As members of the Finance Committee will see throughout the year, several actions that come to us that committee to order and welcome the new members of the committee. We got a lot to do today, so we're going to move efficiently. Just to add a little, offer a little context for the members of the committee. At our last meeting in June, we approved the operating budget for the current fiscal year, fiscal 25, which began on July 1st of this year. As members of the Finance Committee will see throughout the year, several actions that come to us that form the building blocks of the budget. So you'll see some of those items today. That includes the updates to the 6-year plan and the capital amendments to the current biennial state budget. Then before December, we'll host a Finance Committee orientation for those who care to participate. And then at the December meeting, we'll consider graduate tuition. We set tuition last December for undergraduates for 2 years. So we'll consider graduate tuition as well as room and board rates, which we have to do every year. And so given that those tuition actions make sense for those who want to get a little more orientation headed into that in December. And then also in December, we may contemplate a debt authorization for certain capital projects, including second-year housing, we'll see, and SIF spending authorizations for fiscal 26 to fiscal 28. So we've got 5 action items on the agenda today. Those include updates to the aforementioned 6-year plan, operating and capital amendments to the state biennial budget, delegation of signatory authority to JJ for several contracts within the medical center and the academic division, and then also a resolution that is on your desk related to some governance changes on executive comp, pretty much documenting things that we're already doing, but in a more formal way. So with that, I'll turn it over to JJ to walk through the action items.
Great, thank you, Chairman Blue, and happy Friday, everyone. The first item for your consideration is the state-required 6-year institutional plan. This was mandated via the Restructuring Act and Higher Education Opportunity Act, where we actually go through diligently and deliberately and document our institutional strategies and goals that align with the state's higher education goals. We actually have to develop a new plan in the odd number years and then provide any amendments and updates in the even years. So I would say there's the 6-year plan that basically gets amended and revised each and every year. And we do that not only for the University Academic Division, but also for the College at Wise. So as we did last year's comprehensive update, the key priorities for the Academic Division were Success UVA, which you've heard Steve Farmer speak about, pathways to research prominence, which Jim and Ian and Craig have spoken about, and then the bachelor's completion and certificate program initiatives. Key priorities for the College at Wise, and the chancellor's here, and I believe the College at Wise committees later, and we'll speak more in depth, is funding for increased enrollment and the development of additional programs. Also focus at the College at Wise at a more robust research program. So this is an even year for the Commonwealth's budget. So they base that on a calendar year, even though we're in fiscal year 25. So it is designed to confuse. I apologize. We submitted plans this summer to update the 2023 plan. The Ops 6 group, which is a group of state officials, reviews our 6-year plans and any amendments and updates to the plan, and they requested that through the summer. There were no changes to the key strategies in the Academic Division or College at Wise plan, so one could argue that this is very technical in nature. The updates that we did were the following. We did look at expanded access to financial aid, as that is a priority for the Commonwealth. We also did progress towards pan-university research and programmatic initiatives, particularly around the Biotech Institute. At the College of Wise, again, the updates included things around record application numbers, increased enrollment and retention, and launching new academic programs in response to employer demand and student interest. So the Op 6 also then came back over the summer and asked us to include in cover letters information around any changes in admissions, enrollment, retention due to disruptions with the new FAFSA process. And again, thanks to Provost Ian Balcom and Steve Farmer and that amazing team, they were able to handle all the very challenging issues that came their way this year. In addition, we were also required to do Fact Pack, which is an artful term of work that has been going on with the Commonwealth to look at consistent data across the institution. Last, we did update the request for additional state report contingent upon your approval today. So that is the basis of the 6-year plan. Again, it can be somewhat technical in nature. We actually attached it in your documents. It's 45 pages long. But happy to entertain any questions. If not, we would seek your approval on the resolution on page 2.
Judge, you had one quick question. Is this document form the basis for our kind of budget requests at the General Assembly each year? I mean, are
Yes.
This is sort of what that is? Is that how that works? Okay.
Yeah, so it's a 6-year plan that looks not only at sort of what are our priorities and strategies, how it aligns with the Commonwealth's sort of priorities, and then from there it will roll very naturally into budget requests.
Thank you.
Other questions for JJ? Hearing none, there is a resolution on page 2 of the Finance Committee book. Is there a motion?
Moved.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Okay, so next up is the operating and capital amendments for fiscal year 24 to 26 state biennial budget. As you know, we are bringing you these operating and capital requests that we do plan to submit to the governor for consideration of inclusion of his budget. The capital budget requests were actually due August 26th, and they were reviewed by the Secretary of Education. She has approved all of those items, both for UVA and the College at Wise. And the operating requests are due by the end of today before submission to the governor on September 20th. Once these requests are approved, we'll do all the formal submissions. But I will take one step back and give you a reminder about the funding the Commonwealth has provided in our current fiscal year 25 budget. By way of background, the Commonwealth budget is a biennium. It's 2 years, so they've actually put a budget in place for fiscal year 25 and 26, and now this is simply our opportunity to make amendments. So again, this is in sort of the biennium budget has been approved by the governor and the General Assembly. Now it's simply technical amendments or additions if we so seek them. So, incredible year. Thanks to President Jim Ryan, the government relations team, and all of you all. The budget was approved on May 13th of 2024. The Institute of Biotechnology did receive $6.5 million of one-time operating funding and $40 million in fiscal year 26, along with funds for the Equipment Trust Fund, which is really to outfit the building. This amazing team is working right now on the technical details of that, which includes not only obviously capital equipment for the building, but also startup funds for world-class researchers. So I am the least qualified to talk about that, many people around this room, but it's been absolutely an incredible partnership with the Commonwealth, and thanks to Paul Manning and his family, and President Jim Ryan and others. So the budget does make permanent one-time funding we received in 24 for affordable access, both for UVA and at the College of Wise. And the great news is we did receive some funding from the Commonwealth to support our 3% compensation increases. As a quick reminder, that can vary to 10 to 15 cents on the dollar in terms of what we get from the compensation from the Commonwealth, but however grateful, we did receive about $6.7 million to support the compensation costs associated with UVA and at UVA Wise. Please note the expectation is the vast majority of the other costs are to be borne by things like tuition increases. So we will have obviously a robust discussion as we move forward over that. It does put incredible pressure in the system, particularly as we've been limiting tuition less than the rate of the compensation increases historically. Okay, next up, here's a very, very detailed And I'm just going to hit a couple of highlights in the interest of time. These were the submissions on the academic division. By way of background, I think the most prominent and probably most publicly discussed is the Virginia Military Survivors and Dependents Education Program. That has been in existence in some form since 1930. As you know, the original purpose of the program was to provide college tuition to the children of service members who were killed or totally permanently disabled in action. However, there's been a broad expansion of that definition, and especially in 2019, to include anyone who, by death or injury while serving, not just occurred while in combat. So just to give you a sense of the numbers at UVA, this expansion has led to considerable growth and cost pressures at the university. By way of background, in 2019, we approved 36 waivers. In 2024, we issued 275 waivers, or a 664% increase. Because there were limited funds by the Commonwealth, that actually became a cost borne by UVA, not funded by the taxpayers. And that reduction or cost increase that we had to find across the enterprise was $6.3 million annually. So in 2024, the legislative session, there was an attempt to mitigate the fiscal impact by actually going back and constraining the definition of who was eligible. As you probably recall, that was met with lots of public outcry and resistance. As such, we have seen a significant increase of one-time fundings while the General Assembly and the governor go back to work on this issue. So what you see in here is our budget request to go back saying, based on the current eligibility, we would like to see $7.3 million and then $8.4 million in funds to compensate for the waivers that are currently approved. We also have the UVA health plan. As you know, we are self-insured. However, we do ask for the proportionate increase of our employees. We have been unsuccessful in past years over this, but we don't stop trying. It's a pretty big number for us. Utilities, good news is they're moderated, particularly in 26. And we are seeking funds for operation and maintenance of new buildings coming online. Those include, but are not limited to, School of Data Science, Contemplative Commons, Karsh, Institute of Democracy, McIntyre School of Commerce's at Shumway Hall, and the renovation of the College of Arts and Sciences Physics Building. Those of you who have not recently gone on a tour, I'd highly recommend it. There's been some amazing both renovations and new additions to our physical plant, and I'm sure Alice, Don, and Colette would be happy to take you there. Last one, and again, then I'll take any questions here. We are requesting additional funds for the UVA threat assessment team. The threat assessment team, I think as Chief Longo briefed you at the last meeting, has seen case increases more than 60% in the last 2 years. So our budget request represents the state share of expanding that team. In talking with President Ryan, it's not optional, so unfortunately, even if the state or Commonwealth does not come through with funds, you will see a budget request coming through this year in our normal budget process. So I think it's something an essential versus a nice to have. Okay. I will stop there.
Question.
Yes.
Yes, JJ, with regard to expand mental health services, you've got 2.9 million expenditure, 25 and then 0 and 26. Is that CapEx or space?
Yes, that is to outfit the 4th floor. It's about 6,000 square feet of shelled space in the Student Health and Wellness Building. And we think that'd be a great way to expand access for more services if we could shell out that space.
Great, thank you.
JJ, you may have mentioned this, but I missed it. I think the state has already agreed to put more funding into the VIMSTEP program. Do we know yet what?
Yeah, so we got 45 million, of which we got a proportional share of that, but it's one time. So what we're looking for is to make that permanent, because this is.
And what's the delta between what we received and what we're asking for?
If we get the full 7.3 and 8.4, that will cover the costs.
The proportion of the funding this year, what's the gap between?
I still think it's like 4 to 5 million off. I think we got Olga, do you know? Okay, I'll get back to you. I think it's still a multi-million-dollar delta.
I thought it was 3 or 4.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, I would say 4 to 5, but 3 to 4, yeah.
JJ, you said there was a 60% increase in threat assessment
Correct.
activity in that 182 and 186. Is that like hiring another worker? Is that one worker, two workers?
Two.
Okay.
Two. We actually, the full budget request is about $500,000 to go through the UVA budget process. This is the state's proportional share.
Okay.
Other questions for JJ? Hearing none, there is a resolution on page 7 of the Finance Committee book. Is there a motion to approve it?
So moved.
A motion and a second. All in favor, please say aye. Any opposed? All right, now a few contracts.
Okay, so we didn't cover College of Wise. I assume we'll defer that. the
Oh, I'm
details of the
sorry.
Discussion.
I jumped the gun.
You
You
did.
have now approved the College at Wise general fund request, but we will undo that if someone has a major issue with what JJ's about to go over. Just trying to keep us moving.
Okay, got it. Okay, so really quickly, enrollment and retention, again, Chancellor Henry will speak to this. Workforce program strategies, critical research activities, obviously the Virginia Military Survivors Independence Program. So really no surprises, and all has been discussed at the College of Wise previous meetings, but we've now just documented it for submission.
Questions about that? Does anyone now want to undo the vote we just took? All right, that's encouraging. Now we'll move to contracts.
Awesome. Okay, well,
Well, you got your capital.
I have
request.
capital too, I'm sorry. Can I do that one too?
Yes, you
Okay,
may,
thanks.
absolutely.
It's good governance. Request the Commonwealth funding for capital projects is actually managed through a separate, distinct process from the operating budget activities. They actually happen on an earlier timeline, and we're highlighting them here for your reference. They were included in the overall 6-year plan, so none of this should be a surprise to you. And the Board of Visitors approved this for inclusion in the major capital plan last June. So all these projects, the amount requested from the Commonwealth is based on preliminary planning, AKA subject to change, and then project budgets are refined and further developed. So Jim has been active in discussing with the administration, the Center for the Arts, and the Engineering Academic Building, and I know Chancellor Henry's been active on the Durden Hall renovation and the technology classroom. Happy to answer any questions. We do need your approval.
Very good. I think that was encompassed in
Perfect.
the prior resolution. So again, I offer my willingness to undo the prior vote. I'm pretty sure it was all in that one.
Could I ask one quick question?
Absolutely.
On the Arts Center, last time we were talking about that, I thought we had a $50 million contribution. And it
Correct.
looked like there was another 65 that we were gonna, have we raised that money, or is that to be raised? And then you've got the state request?
Do you want to take that? Would you like
So
me to?
our hope and plan is to raise the money.
Okay.
It looks promising based on. Open plan.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll be optimistic.
Not
this
over
morning.
till it's over.
Okay. All right. Next up is the signatory authority for academic division, and I also have medical center contracts. As you know, the Board of Visitors is required to approve the execution of any contract where the amount per year is in excess of $5 million. And I use the words at or around just to be measured and appropriate. Please note for the academic division, the university is already under contract with Acme Technical Group, which is what you see in the resolution, for on-demand services for building access systems and related areas. It is very nominal amount. In light of all of the things with respect to safety and security, the university is now embarking on a more centralized access control environment for buildings across grounds. What we're going to do is then have remote area access systems where we can do location interdependent or undisclosed, be able to lock physical buildings down. So we are planning to execute that contract, and we would look for your approval.
Questions on this? There is a resolution on page 8 of the Finance Committee book. Is there a motion to approve it? Have a motion and a second. All in favor, please say aye. Any opposed? Now medical center contracts.
Okay. So we have 3 for your approval today. Obviously, it's above the $5 million threshold, and so therefore, we need your approval so it can be delegated to us. The first is Johnson & Johnson Healthcare, and obviously this is for trauma products. Just to give you a sense, contract value is north of $16 million. Medtronic, which again is an existing contract, but given the volume going through it, we're thinking that will go over the threshold. That's really around ENT procedures, including pediatrics, and then Encompass Group for environmental services, food and nutrition services. So, and again, this is an amendment, but it's going to trip them potentially more than $5 million a year. So, worked with Craig and his team on all of these, and would seek your approval.
Questions for Craig or JJ? Steve?
Mr. Chair, although not a member of the committee, but as a physician, I assume that Johnson & Johnson Medtronics have all been thoroughly vetted through the competitive process?
They have.
And that there are no conflicting interests with faculty members who may or may not have association with these organizations?
Correct. This is all run through a separate procurement process.
Other questions?
So Compass provides environmental and food nutrition?
Yes. Yes.
Part of that 1,000
How much do you really want to probe on
They're a
that?
highly diverse, they're a highly
Soy
diversified,
burgers or what?
they're a highly diversified company, I mean.
Different groups, I'm hoping.
Let's see.
All right, we're really getting to the meat of the matter, so to speak. All right, is there a motion to approve the resolution on page 9 of the, we have a motion, is there a second?
Second.
All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? And then our last action item is at your chair. It's a resolution that essentially codifies a number of things that have already been happening in one place, which is a new subcommittee of the Finance Committee. And you can see its duties listed in the 4th paragraph. We've been discussing this, a number of people have been discussing this for a while, but essentially review the president's performance and then advise the president on comp related to senior executives, a small group of senior executives, and sort of set a pay philosophy. Again, a lot of that already happening now in this new structure. Thanks to Rachel for her work on this. Are there questions about this?
Mr. Chair, number one, is it a committee as titled Executive Compensation, or is it an executive committee that's looking at compensation? Because that conflicts with paragraph 4 when it mentions specifically in line 4 related to employee compensation. So that's some ambiguity in the language, at least from my perspective as a dumb lawyer. Dumb doctor, sorry.
I don't see.
There are no dumb lawyers.
I was waiting for that. I was waiting. David, help me out. Come on. And maybe it's just the way I'm reading it as an English major, but
Yeah, I'm not following your question, to be perfectly honest. It's a subcommittee, standing subcommittee of the Finance Committee with the duties described in those 4 paragraphs, which would include advising the president related to compensation for senior executives and I guess employees drafted to be inclusive, but the focus is going to be on a small group, and the committee will ultimately decide what that group is.
yeah. So that's kind of what I thought, but there was some conflicting information there. And then the review of the president has historically been the job of this board to independently evaluate the president. Are you
No,
suggesting?
this is just to make a recommendation to the board.
Correct, yeah,
Yes.
exactly. So this is, it's, the process will be very similar to what's been in the past, except it was really the rector and vice rector, and now it'll be a little more of this committee, but for the recommendation and then ultimately the full board. So no change there.
And
So
then
the,
my
wait,
last-
so the recommendation is not of my salary is not coming to the president?
It's very, very different.
And Bob, my third question would be under item 3 in paragraph 4, to review and advise the president regarding compensation for senior executive officers and employees. And is that of the entire university health system and academic component?
No, well, it will, this applies to both the health system and academic, but it's not every employee in the academic or health systems. It is, again,
It applies across
intended-
the university.
but it
So
is-
that includes the health system.
Yes.
Yes.
And that would therefore include executive
It's gonna
In the health
include the
system.
group that the charter decides it's gonna conclude. So if they read the next sentence, it says positions will be determined jointly by the board.
Right.
So the committee has to meet, we have to decide specifically where we're going to be giving specific advice and consent.
To your point, it's
Yeah.
both academic and.
But it's academic and health.
As a
Yes.
question, does the health system have its own sort of consultant or system in place
Yes.
now?
Yeah,
Does.
so we'll have to get input from Craig, Dr. Kent and others about
The
that,
HR team.
And the HR team, yeah, and it, yeah.
Will this transcend to the level of highly compensated physicians who are department chairs, division chiefs? Could
No,
they?
I highly doubt that.
That's
It's-
not,
very
that's not in your.
That's not our world.
Okay,
That's not
that's
our
what I was
world,
curious.
yeah.
Yeah, no.
Other questions? Okay, because the chair of the finance committee was tardy in submitting this to the corporate secretary, we actually need two motions here. One is to take this up, since it wasn't in the board book, and then the second would be to approve it. So the first is a motion to allow the committee to consider this. Do I have a motion? Do we have a second?
Second.
All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, and then the second is to approve the resolution. Do I have a motion? And a second?
Second.
All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Very good. We now have three reports. JJ and others are going to talk sort of high level about the university financial picture and priorities, particularly as it relates to the Strategic Investment Fund. We'll get a brief summary of the substantial number of reports submitted to the Commonwealth over the course of the summer. And then Robert Durden will give us an update on UVMCO. So JJ and others kick it off on the bigger picture.
Great, so very quickly, and again, happy to take some of this offline or into the finance orientation in the fall, talk a little bit about our macro organizational structure, talk about some recent activity in the rating agencies, how are they viewing UVA, and then go quickly into a quick snapshot of debt profile, and then turn to SIF. So, very quickly, as you know, you all appointed by the governor, confirmed by the General Assembly, preside over the University of Virginia. It's actually three separate state agencies. There was some questions about how do we show our finances relative to the Health System Board. So I attempted in a graphic to show you how are things coming up through the Health System Board, which is an amalgamation or aggregation of several items that sit in different legal entities. So again, overall, we're one 501c3, one tax ID, fully consolidated, one set of financial statements now with three divisions. You'll hear more about that in audit today. And secondly, the UVA Health is actually comprised of the Med Center, which is a separate state agency. For aggregation purposes, it does look at UPG while it is a separate 501c3. So again, as the rating agencies, they would not flow that through to us. And then the School of Medicine, School of Nursing, and University of Virginia Health Sciences Library, which actually technically aggregates up to through the academic division or the academic state agency. Again, very quickly here, you can see the interplay, three separate state agencies. The way it works and functions is as a legal one 501c3, but then now what we've done for our financials is to segment it into three divisions. That is new for us. In addition to that, 9 of the UAOs, or University Associated Organizations, are included in our statements. And so hopefully in December, we will be back presenting this document for you for fiscal year 2024.
JJ, can I ask one quick question?
Yep.
So is it accurate to say we're one credit except for UPG?
We are absolutely one credit, and we'll show
Okay.
you that. We do the 9 affiliated organizations to the extent that they issue debt. Sometimes they use our full faith and credit, so some of it flows through. So it gets that secondary answer gets a little bit more complicated, but for purpose of the Med Center, College at Wise, UVA, that's all one, and
Gotcha.
Fitch, S&P, and Moody's all view us as one. Okay, so I'm gonna go right to that. So again, here's the work that we've been doing. General revenues issued for debt. We have about, you can see the Murray metrics, which we put at your placeholder, about $3.3 billion of debt outstanding. Our weighted cost of capital right now is about 3.29%, and the life of that debt is about 37 years. But we are one, so as we think about how we're growing, whether it be the College at Wise, the academic division, and/or UVA Health, we have to put all of that together for the single issuance of debt. It's not separate, it's one. Okay, so, and this just illustrates it here. Again, we have about $3.3 billion in our debt portfolio. It sits well within the metrics of AAA-rated credits. We have been doing an extensive amount of work. You heard it last night from Rector Hardy in terms of being very strategic in getting into the market and getting really low cost of capital. So a couple of things really quickly. We were just reaffirmed by two of the rating agencies over the summer. We are obviously in a strong financial position. I can't underscore the team working here together, and the rating agencies actually showcase that later as one of the important assets that UVA brings to the table. Obviously, they love our diversity of revenues, our asset position, which you'll hear about from UVIMCO, and the strong endowment performance, the incredible fundraising, and then in recent years, the reinvestment at the Commonwealth level. So it's still lagging 1990 years, but the last 3 years in particular, the investments in the biotech, some of the investments in the core operating have been really accretive to us. There are, however, as we look at all of this, known risks. Obviously, recruitment and retention challenges. You hear that in all three of our organizations or state agencies. And then the more competitive environment of the medical center and the regulatory environments for all of us. A couple of the other known risks that we're still struggling with include things like data privacy, always cybersecurity, and then the costs of emergency events of recent. So this is just a global, I'm not going to spend any time on this, sort of what are rating agencies saying about higher education overall. Moody's outlook was quite stable for 2024. S&P offered a more cautious outlook. And then I'll just, again, these were pre-reads. So 2024, however, is bringing now a more stable outlook from Moody's. But the bifurcation of the sector in general between larger, more selective institutions versus smaller, less selective and tuition dependent. So here's more specifically UVA's credit rating summary. Again, these were just published this summer. And again, I believe we put the full readouts in your portal. And if anybody wants additional, we'll provide it. We now sit in a very rarefied space. We are only one of 4 public institutions left in the country by all 3 rating agencies rated AAA. They talk about why they view us as a AAA rated. Again, very strong management, governance, board, impressive demand, and then also talk about credit considerations and potential downgrades in the future. Why is this all important? Because as we're assessing all of our capital needs, it is likely that we will ask for you all to entertain and consider a debt shelf registration as early as December.
You want to explain what that means in this?
Sure. So debt shelf registration basically is a pre-authorization that the board gives UVA Finance and my team the ability then to take advantage when market conditions are ripe to go. It is a newer instrument that was designed with John Griffin and Jim Murray several years ago, and with your approval, historically we've had to wait and then come back through the normal cadence of a board meeting, and we can miss being opportunistic in the market. So a debt shelf basically is a pre-authorization, and then we can think about when we want to go into the market and actually issue the debt, which obviously we work with lots of experts on that. Here, just to give you a sense of the work we've been doing on the debt portfolio, I would say it's one of the most exciting things for us that sit in the financial world. Special shout out to Julie Richardson and the whole Treasury team and under Augie Morelli. We've taken incredible advantage of the markets. Just to give you a sense, the last 3 deals we did, and again, I do not want to underscore that I'm not sure we could do this again, or get close, but we're going to try. We issued 100-year Century bonds at 3.227%. We issued 30-year non-taxable at 2.18% and 30-year taxable at 2.256. So you can see what that has done overall in terms of our decreasing rates. I think this is particularly fun for us. Again, assuming we can show you the analysis, we are potentially going to ask for consideration in December.
But these kinds of results were the result of being able to be opportunistic and
Yes.
have the flexibility to go where you
Yes.
needed to go.
Yes.
I had a question. Maybe Rachel or one of the other experts, a shelf registration, isn't that sort of an SEC term? Like you've pre-cleared all the
Yes.
filing documents so that it's getting that out of the way, right? As opposed to,
But it's also
am I making that right? Am I
Yes.
thinking about that correctly? Okay.
Yes.
You're hired.
Oh, no.
Can you go back
If you
one
didn't have
slide?
that, you'd have to go through the registration process.
Yes.
So you need it so that you're ready to go in that respect too. Right, not just board approval, right.
In the bottom right back box under downgrade factors, unexpected and protracted erosion of AMC. What is AMC?
Academic Medical Center.
Why is that there?
Why do they put that? Because I think that the rating agencies look at our overall book of business, or sort of 60% medical center, 40% academic medical. If you look at the competition and the pressures and the regulatory environment and the margins, they're a riskier portfolio then. So what they want to make sure is that our portfolio overall is balanced and that we're really sort of managing the downside risk of the health enterprise.
Yeah, I just add to it. We showed in the slide in the health system board yesterday that there's quite a number of academic health systems across the country that are losing money now. So I see this as a generic message. It's not about us, but it's generically saying one of the risks of any academic institution is their health system might not perform well. I mean, the good news is we're performing
Right.
well, but it's a complicated world out there, and they know it, and they're drawing attention to that.
So really quickly, one of the things we've been working on is the Board of Visitors approved project with use of desk instruments is about $775 million, including the Paul and Diane Manning Institute of Biotechnology, which we project we're going to issue about $250 million worth of debt. The big items coming onto the table for consideration as early as December, second-year housing, and then the Center for the Arts. So those are all the things, again, we look out a decade in terms of debt needs, and then obviously want to be really opportunistic when the markets present themselves. So more to come on that, but just wanted to lay some sort of what's to come between now and potentially December. Okay. So I'm going to turn really quickly. So progress in the year ahead, I would say it was an incredibly busy summer with all of the leadership, with lots and lots of requests for data, reports, and so forth. Specifically, not just the normal budget requests, but we got a series of JLARC, the Joint Legislative Group, looking at everything from efficiencies, financial viability, and so forth. Those reports have not yet been issued publicly, and as they do, we'll try to make sure the board is apprised. We may not know how much in advance, but we'll try to give you a sense of what is contained in those reports relative to UVA. The first one we think will come out is how do the 15 public institutions sit with respect to a variety of financial metrics. As you can quite imagine, UVA is well positioned in terms of its viability. Again, one of only 4 AAA rated, but it's a different set of metrics that we provided data to. So just so you know, there's a lot of sort of Commonwealth-based reports that will generate media interest, and we'll do our best, as we've done a lot of the data aggregation and submissions over the summer, to try to keep the Finance Committee apprised as those reports come out, and then how does UVA fare in these sort of more global reports. And again, special thanks to Steve Farmer and the UVA finance team. I mean, it's been a lot of work this summer. And last but I would say is you hear a lot about the fact pack. We just did another turn. We're hearing maybe October, November for that. To the extent that that gets finalized, we'll bring that back in December as well. That's a great sort of efficiency, effectiveness measures across a broad swath of dimensions. Obviously, UVA's value proposition sits sort of top in the country. Okay. Can I go to strategic investment fund?
Yes, indeed.
Okay, So our next topic this morning is the University Strategic Investment Fund. We affectionately call it SIF for short. The goal is to really kind of do a board orientation and education session around the SIF's purpose, its original formulation, current guidelines, and obviously its impressive impacts, not just UVA, the Commonwealth, but globally. Again, no action today. I think we'd love to make this interactive, and or if there are questions or comments, things that we can do, because I think as early as December, we would like to come back for consideration of approvals around the dollar amounts, and we've got a slide in here to discuss that. So really quickly, I'm just going to move, took my glasses off, sorry. Strategic Investment Fund purpose. This is just a background. You can see the purpose is around our core mission, serving the Commonwealth of Virginia, the nation, and the world. Next slide you can see is that in 2019, the SIF now is the key component to funding part of the 2030 strategic plan. The original SIF was developed in 2016. Since inception, it has awarded 78 different initiatives for nearly $1 billion. Projects are selected since 2019 by the University Leadership Fund with approval of the board. So we'll talk in depth about sort of the process, how it works, and so forth. So way before the actual establishment in 2016 and the kickoff, there was an enormous runway up to that, which actually started back in 2002. Prior to this period of time, we had limited investment authority at UVA over our financial resources. The Code of Virginia was actually amended, and it allowed the Restructuring Act through 2005 to begin to allow us to invest a portion of our financial resources in our long-term pool with UVIMCO, and you're going to hear from them next. The pool's performance proved instrumental in growing what subsequently became the base of the Strategic Investment Fund. As a result of that, in 2014, a subcommittee of the Finance Committee began to work to fund SIF on the original strategic plan, once named the Cornerstone Program under President Terry Sullivan. That work then required approval of a liquidity policy permitting the establishment of operating lines of credits, right? Because you've locked up basically 4,000 accounts, and we'll talk about that in the long-term pool, so had to mitigate the downside risk. Great news is that to date, none of those operating lines of credits have ever been tapped. So again, incredible talent, a group of people both at UVIMCO and within UVA Finance that really manage the operating liquidity across all these lines. The initial guidelines were established in April of 2016, governing the administration of SIF. Those guidelines were revised by this board in August of 2019, support our current strategic plan, which we affectionately call the 2030 plan. So again, more details, but I got some questions in advance on this. The corpus of SIF was actually created by aggregating accumulated reserves all across the institution, both capital and operating. Literally, there's north of 4,000 accounts. When I got here in 2018, we actually did a full-blown audit of that, and so we identified every single account that was being aggregated up. The corpus of SIF actually remains intact and is available to whoever the account owner is. So the SIF is simply the accumulated interest based on UVIMCO's performance. So at a high, since I've been here, the SIF was at $2.6 billion as of fiscal year 24, June 30th, and that account was $1.9 billion. We actually have two accounts that we then further segregate out because it's the employee self-insurance fund, so the corpus now sits at about $1.7 billion. You will see that later as we do analysis to project what could SIF awards be available then for 26 through 28. And I'm apology if I'm getting too bean countery, but this is the stuff we love here. Strategic investment, external review. So there was a big, when this was first envisioned, some controversy, as you can imagine, around this. There was actually a full-blown audit in 2016 to make sure that SIF program was in compliance with the Code of Virginia. The APA, Auditor of Public Accounts, did confirm that actually it was in compliance, that we manage all funds appropriately. The board has the ability to authorize the use of SIF. Our lines of credit were appropriately in place for backup liquidity. Tuition fees and general fund dollars are not included in any of the balances of SIF, and that all restrictions on the fund are and were honored. So again, a little bit more detail here then. In 2019, the University Board of Visitors adopted the use of SIF for the new strategic plan, the 2030 Good and Great Plan. Please note, and I think Jim will speak more eloquently than I to this, the SIF awards, more than half have been directly attributable to the bicentennial scholars and bicentennial professorships. Again, all the funding is centered around the 2030 plan. At that, in 2022, also one additional change, the decision was made to bifurcate off about $400 million for the formation of a medical center strategic and reserve fund. So again, part of the reason why the $2.6 billion went down now to sort of about 1.7, 1.9 was the decision to wall off some funds available for medical center strategic initiatives.
JJ, were any of those $400 million originally part of the medical center fund
Yes.
anyway?
Yes.
So you just reverted back to
Correct.
control by the medical center of this and what was the rationale, the thinking for that?
I think that the medical center has a bunch of strategic initiatives, like the bed tower, that they're gonna need to use for the distribution, and we wanted to make sure that they had the appropriate resources available. All of it's still governed by the board, so you'll see if we turn on a medical center SIF distribution, we'll bring that to the board, but that's in Craig's long-range financial plan. Okay, the current guiding principles of the SIF are shown on this slide. I don't need to belabor them. There's actually a 3-page document, which is on our website, plus every SIF award. So lots and lots of important information about what are the principles that the board has put down. I need to advance the slide, sorry. There you go, thank you. Please note, SIF allocations are for large-scale projects where possible with a phased and incremental approach of funding. They should leverage external funds, which again, President Jim Ryan and the leadership team has been wildly successful in doing, whether it's philanthropy, federal funding, grants, et cetera. They are expected to have a 3-year or less incubation or startup phase, and it is not to supplant or otherwise replicate the annual operating budget process, which I think is critically important. So it is not for long-term sustainability. So it is to really be a startup, a catalyst, a matching for transformative things. Next here, you can simply say the 2030 pillars. Again, thanks to Margaret Rogers and the whole team there for this incredible 2030 plan. They're directly supported by allocations of SIF. There's actually 4 pillars here. Just to give you a quick example, strengthening the foundation, obviously bicentennial scholarships, and Jim can talk about the incredible success with that. Making UVA synonymous for service, the green box, you can see an example being UVA online education. So really trying to advance the work under Provost Balcom and the team. So how do we administer this? Obviously, critically important with $1 billion in play. It is regularly monitored and assessed, guided by the nature of the investments. And I'm going to dive really quickly here. You can see all projects that are selected funding have to fall within the overall guidelines approved by the Board of Visitors. We then have a SIF Oversight Committee. All the 3 EVPs sit on that, as well as the CFO and the VPR. There is then a post-award assessment committee. We affectionately call that the PAC. That is co-chaired by the VPR and CFO Augie Morelli. And that is an annual review of all SIF awards relative to metrics and performance against that. Again, all of that documented. And then we also have a post-award administrative team that goes in with administrative and financial staff to make sure all the appropriate accounting and controls are in place. We also consult with Carolyn Saint, our auditor, on that as well.
VPR.
Vice President for Research.
Sorry, Lori McMahon, you met yesterday. Sorry, I have lots of acronyms. And then we also annually produce a report on all the investments, which is also on our Strategic Investment Fund UVA website. So you can see the impact of what's happening with SIF. So now for the meaty part of the discussion, one of the things that we're working on right now, again, no decisions today, is that we always like to plan in advance. And so here you can see the work and the ranges that we're thinking about. As I said, the SIF as it ended at June 30th, 2024 is about 1.9 billion. And again, I think it's appropriate that we back out the employee health fund. So 1.78 billion right now. So we're thinking allocation ranges on the conservative side of 60 million a year, on the potentially more aggressive, or how market performance and the underlying accounts base sits, about $70 million a year. So more to come on this. We will stress test all this and bring back a recommendation for discussion as early as December. I think I should stop there and turn it to President Jim Ryan, who might want to talk a little bit more. Again, he's way more eloquent than I am every day with respect to the impact of the SIF.
Sure. I thought it would be useful to talk about the investments in scholarships and professorships. I know some of you have heard this, but for those of you who already have it, it'll be an update. And for those who are new, I think it's really important to understand this particular use of SIF. As you saw in an earlier slide, this has been the single biggest investment from the SIF funds, and that has been to create matching programs for scholarships, student scholarships, and matching programs for professorships. The degree of matching has varied over time and depending on the kind of scholarship and the kind of professorship, but the basic idea is simple, that we will match at to a certain extent, either 50% or up to 100%, of a donation that creates a student scholarship or a student or a faculty professorship. And just to give you a sense of the numbers, over the last 5 or 6 years when we started this, we have been able to generate $380 million in donations for student scholarships and have matched that with $270 million for a total of $650 million for student scholarships. To give you a sense of the impact of this, there are 700 new scholarship endowments. And over the last 4 years, the percentage of students who are on donor-funded, need-based scholarships has increased by 170%. We've been equally successful on the professorship side, and there we've been able to raise $316 million from donors. We have contributed $212 million in matching funds for a total of $530 million of an impact. To give you a sense of the professorships that have been established, these are chaired professorships. We've raised money for over 130 professorships. That's a rate of 20 plus a year. Just to give you some comparison, prior to this matching program, we were raising, correct me if I'm wrong, Mark, funds for 4 to 5 professorships a year.
What's the cost of a professorship now?
It varies, and that's the last point I'll make. It varies by school, so it's basically pegged to cover a large portion or the totality of someone's salary. And that varies from school to school. There's a difference between arts and sciences, for example, and Durden and the law school. But the range is 2 million to 4 or 5 million. But I'm glad you asked that, because one category that we created was the university professorship. So we had university professorships already, and they are meant to be the most prestigious faculty chair that you can have. And they're meant to enable the holders of those chairs to teach anywhere in the university. They have not been funded, however. They've been purely honorific. And the difficulty with allowing someone to teach outside of a particular school, if the funding is coming solely from the school, is that that's just the generosity of one school to another school. So we decided to invest in 10 university professorships at a $10 million endowment that we matched 1-to-1. So someone who gave a gift for $5 million, we would match with $5 million. And our goal was to create 10 of these. And obviously this is meant to bring in or retain true superstars, those who are not only going to have an impact in their schools, but an impact across the university, and those who are going to attract other scholars as well. And I'm pleased to say, once we fixed a hiccup, these proved really popular. And the hiccup was, we had originally thought of asking for $6 million and we would match $4 million. And then Jimmy Wright, who is a very keen and experienced and smart fundraiser, said to me after about a year of not much success in trying to get interest in this, he said, no one talks about $6 million and $4 million. It doesn't make any sense to people. Why don't you just do 5 and 5? And sure enough, with that switch, within the next year, we had at least 5, and now we have been able to fund all 10. So why does this matter? There are a few reasons, all of which are important. The first is, it has obviously helped fundraising. I mean, I think Mark would tell you that. If you are speaking to a potential donor, they are interested in what are the university's priorities. And one way to demonstrate, maybe the most effective way to demonstrate a priority, is to say that the university is going to contribute its own funds as well. The second, and this is a really important point, is that this all adds to the endowment. So this is using SIF funds and donations, not for one-time expenditures, but this is now all part of the university's endowment. So the money from SIF is in a long-term pool. It's not an endowment. It's a long-term pool that's investing the reserves. So this is pulling out the interest of that and putting it in endowment for professorships and scholarships. So if you think about this, not only has it enabled more fundraising, not only is it supporting student scholarships and professorships, but we've added over $1 billion to the endowment through this, which obviously will continue to benefit the university for decades to come. The last point, which is also important to recognize, is that we're often asked, and I think when the SIF was first created, this was a part of the discussion, why don't you use this to keep tuition low? Well, this is precisely the impact of this, because our financial aid, and we are one of only 2 public universities that commit to funding 100% of demonstrated need, and for the last 3 years have been ranked as the #1 public university for financial aid. I mean, it's an amazing commitment that this board made years ago. We fund our financial aid in part by drawing on endowment, but in part by drawing on tuition. The more that we can draw on endowment funds, the less pressure there is on tuition. So anytime we add to the endowment for financial aid, we are easing pressure on tuition. Second, same with professorships. The endowment that is behind a faculty chair is meant to cover a portion or all of a faculty member's salary. Absent that endowment, there are relatively few other sources of funds, the major one of which is tuition. So in a very real way, by adding $1 billion to the endowment for undergraduate scholarships and for professorships, it is easing pressure on the need to tap tuition to cover those expenses. All of which is to say that, I mean, there are a lot of success stories in SIF, and the other big investments have been in research infrastructure, which Ian can talk about if you have questions about it. But this, I think, has been a complete home run in terms of supporting something that is absolutely crucial, attracting great students and attracting and retaining great faculty, and one that has added to the university's bottom line. So, Mark, I don't know if you have anything to add in terms of how this has helped you and others, but if you do, feel free to share.
I would just say one thing is, you know, the President mentioned how we've created 700 funds and scholarships. Those funds are in all shapes and sizes. You know, some are smaller, some are larger, help a lot of students. I think the other part that has changed is a culture more broadly. So yes, we've created 700 scholarship endowments that have been matched. We've actually created over 1,100 scholarship endowments. 400 of them haven't been matched just because they were through someone's estate or through someone else. but the whole program raised awareness around the need to raise scholarships. So I think it's helped on the scholarship, but it's really helped culturally for us to think about it. And one data point I saw the other day, which I think is interesting, up until the launch of the Bicentennial Scholarship Program, the university had about 2,200 endowments focused purely on scholarships. We've added 1,100 through the matching funds and through the other ones that were created. So in just a short period of time, we've created a third of all endowments for scholarships in the university compared to the overall history of the university.
Mark?
Yeah.
Yep. Can you comment also, the prior to this establishment of the SIF and scholarships, need-based scholarships, when Access UVA was created and when we were trying to raise money for need-based scholarships and the amount of money we were raising compared to what we're raising today?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Rector. So my first year here was 2014, and that was really when we really started to talk about need-based scholarships a lot more than we used to. That year, our total fundraising across the entire grounds for need-based scholarships was $750,000. And the President just mentioned since then the hundreds of millions that have been raised.
Okay. Yeah, thanks. Sounds like this has been a runaway success, so congratulations. My question is it's just a fundamental question. As I've been on the board now 2.5 years, and you talk about acronyms. It took me a while to figure out what this one was. What's different? I mean, it sounds like this is a good, purposeful effort by the board and administration to improve the school. What's different about the SIF money from any other money we have? I mean, why it seems like there's a magic around it or something. Like, it seems like it's endowment funds, we use it to benefit the school, professorships, scholarships, lots of other key things, but why is it in a separate category or have a separate label on it from any other kind of capital investments we make or any other, I'm trying to understand what is it that's different compared to all the other stuff we do?
So it's a great question, and I don't know if anyone was here at the origins, but my understanding is that the idea behind this, and Bill Goodwin was one of the architects, one of the main architects, was that he wanted there to be a fund that was specifically designated for strategic investments. And he knew that in a large organization, you can have a pool of money that then just gets distributed everywhere and doesn't have a big impact. So the idea was to create this segregated pool of money for investments that are truly strategic. And I think that was actually a really smart idea because he was interested in having impact with these funds. That is, funds that you might not otherwise be able to tap into, but they had to be for really strategic purposes. That's why if you go back to some of the guidelines, it is meant not to be covering typical operational costs, because it would then just get absorbed in.
So is it like a nimble thing? Is that the way you think about it, Jim? Like being able to move quickly? Is that the idea, or is it? I mean, again, I mean, what you're saying makes perfect sense. I'm just trying to understand what. We should make strategic investments. I think everyone agrees with that, right?
It's more like
what's different.
I don't know that it's. I don't know what nimbleness is.
Okay.
It's funding that enables you to do things that you might not otherwise be able to do, right? So absent SIF, I don't know where we would come up with matching funds, for example.
Can I ask one question?
Let me just offer sort of the way I think about it, which is in a highly decentralized organization, this was designed by Goodwin wisely to create this dedicated funding source that would otherwise potentially just go all over the place for strategic priorities. So it's a mechanical way to achieve some centralization that didn't exist before, and it has been very effective.
Like a focus lens.
Correct,
kind of thing.
exactly.
So
Where would this money be if it weren't in the SIF?
let me comment on that, because I've talked to Bill Goodwin about this a lot since before I came on the board. And he describes it more as discovering these little pockets all over the place, which were basically unused, previously budgeted money, but unused sort of contingency buckets that everybody had in their various groups. and he sort of identified, I guess he had his CFO or somebody dig in and found all this, and then came up with this great idea. I went back and I read his quotes, and yeah, it was about strategic investments. I mean, I think he'd be proud of many of the things that have happened here. But my only question is, from a governance perspective, back then, there was a faculty committee that came up with these ideas, and then there was an advisory committee which had was representation with the chair, rector, vice rector, and 2 board appointees that then reviewed those proposals from the faculty committee. I think they were a minority, but they were on it. And then that advisory committee recommended to the board. And now there's no board representation on any part of the process. So, not saying this in a negative way or that we want to be an impediment to anything, but does that mean we don't have transparency into the, I like the idea of having transparency into the process as these ideas are coming up, not to stop them, but just to know, because one thing I don't want to see is, here's the board book, you have 5 days to approve $200 million of SIF, you know what I mean? So I just think it gives you earlier insight into the process to at least think about it. So just when you're talking about these kind of dollars, it just makes sense. You want to be able to think about it. So what's the context for how that changed?
That's also a good question. So the way the dollars were allocated prior to my arrival, you're right, was through this committee. And a lot of the proposals were to fund particular research projects. That was the bulk of the awards.
Right.
I think there was a sense that might not be the most strategic use of the funds for 2 different reasons. One, the awards were pretty small, and there were a lot of them, so it was spread out. Second, there was a sense that if we should be using the funds to support research, we should be using the funds to support research infrastructure, not funding the research itself, because there are all sorts of external funding sources for research. So we should be enabling faculty to be in a position to get external funding rather than supplanting that by providing internal funding. I think there was also a sense when I arrived that the SIF should really be about funding the university's strategic priorities that were part of the strategic plan, which the board was heavily involved in. So to a certain extent, the work was done up front. So this is our strategic plan. We've got a strategic investment fund. The investment fund should be connected to this plan. And so there were guidelines set out about you could use so much of the funding for this pillar of the strategic plan, so much of the funding for this pillar of the strategic plan. But beyond that, there were a lot of conversations about, okay, within those buckets, what are you thinking about investing in? So I think it was a pullback a little bit, a recognition that this should be tied to the strategic plan, a pullback in terms of having the board approve every single award that goes out through SIF, but instead trusting the administration to make the investments that are consistent with the strategic plan and consistent with conversations about how that money should be used. And that was the basic.
And David, having been here along with Marvin and along with John, this all followed in on the heels of John Griffin's Blue Ridge Scholar Award. The board then looked through Bill Goodwin's guidance about how we could look at strategic investments. And the board was very explicit and very determined that under the guise of good shared governance, that it was only logical that the board should have representation on how this money is distributed. Now, I don't know the history of why that went away, but the board and the minutes will reflect, if Susan goes back and checks it, that we were very adamant about that, as you recall, Marvin.
And I'm not.
So I don't want to cut off conversation. We've got Rachel and we've got Robert Durden and we've got 8 minutes left in this meeting. And so what I would say is that's why we brought this today without any action. There are opportunities to discuss it. But I think we should be guided by the experience that has occurred since it was adopted.
Absolutely.
We've learned a lot, I think. The administration has, I think, as Doug said, it's a home run. And that's important for us to think about. As we think about governance, what we don't want to do is wander back into something that ends up we're approving 200 small research proposals.
That's why
it's
we
not
did this.
strategic.
That's
Exactly.
why we did this. The other
Great
thing,
choice.
Mr. Chair, quickly, not for right now, but in the future, I would really like to have a breakdown of how the medical center strategic reserve fund is employed, administered. It concerned me, your comment was, well, for instance, something happens with the bed tower. I would hope that that strategic fund is not for bricks and mortar and capital. And we don't need to discuss it, Mr. Chair, but I'd like to understand it more in the future.
I'm happy to bring it back.
Yeah.
Just quickly, JJ, in terms of bringing some additional information back over to think about to maybe the Finance Committee, it would be helpful if you could give us a sense of the PAC and what things they look at, because obviously it's very intuitive to all of us that the matching funds were hugely successful. I'd like to understand the other metrics, who establishes them, how have they played out with respect to the other grants, so that we kind of look at the proposals, we understand the ROI on those other uses of funds. So if that's something you could bring back, that'd be
Happy
great.
to do that.
And second point, I'd like to understand, you said there's a 2016 audit of this SIF process, and that obviously has not happened since 2016. Is that something we envision ever happening again? I'd just like to talk about that with you. Thank you.
Okay, I think you've already talked about the reports to
Yeah,
the
let's
state,
just go
unless
right
people
to-
have particular questions, but
Yeah, let's just go.
Robert fortunately provided a good deck in advance, so we'll turn it over to him. Thanks for being here. Greatly appreciated.
Good morning, everyone. Good to be here as always. I'm joined by my colleague, Christina Alamar. And I'll let you kick us off.
Great. Thank you, everyone. Really appreciate the time. I know time is of the essence, so I think we'll be going through this relatively quickly. We'll provide a brief overview of who we are and what we do, a market update, talk about performance, asset allocation, and risk management. I will say we have a write-up, including our annual commentary in the board materials, so please direct your attention to that should you need more information. We are also publishing our annual report to our website next week, so another source of information on UVMCO for those who might be interested. I also, before we dive into this, wanted to really briefly address a topic that's probably top of mind for a couple of folks in the room, and that is the topic of divestment. We are not divesting from any investments in response to the student referendum that was passed earlier this year. Our primary objective, which Robert will talk about later, is to generate strong risk-adjusted returns for the University of Virginia. We do not utilize divestment or negative screens for non-financial reasons. So I just wanted to make that clear since I have the mic. Turning to governance for UVMCO, we have a fantastic, skilled board of directors. A couple quick changes here. Ted Weschler joined our board earlier this summer. We are unbelievably thrilled to have him. He's a household name in investment management, and we're really excited to have him as part of our team. And John Connaughton took over as our board chair earlier this summer, took over from Mitch Cohen. Also really excited for his leadership going forward.
Could I ask a question?
Yes, sir.
I'm sorry, I know we're short on time. Ever since I've been on the board, there's been a member of the Board of Visitors on the UVMCO board. But I think as we sit here, there isn't. And I just thought, since the endowment is the lifeblood of the university, I think that might be something to consider, is having someone on the Board of Visitors who's on the UVMCO board too.
Sure, why don't we skip to the UVA, UVMCO connections slide? I think it addresses that point a little bit. So for those of you who are not familiar with kind of the corporate governance connections, we do have 3 BOV appointees on the UVMCO Board of Directors, and then 1 presidential appointee, which is generally speaking the COO of UVA. Our current BOV appointees are George Martin, Jim Murray, and Tim O'Hara. You will see obviously 2 former rectors on our board. We have had sitting BOV members in the past, always happy to do that. I think that one of the reasons why it's atypical is that the ask is so high. The ask is so high to sit on the BOV, the ask is pretty high to sit on the UVMCO board, so we generally get people after they've
When was the
And
last
just to
time
be-
you did not have a sitting member of the Board of Visitors on UVMCO's board?
The last time.
2020. I mean, I joined in 2018. In fact, we did not have a sitting member of the BOV on the board until Jim Murray was named to our board.
Yeah.
I want to be clear that my comments aren't directed at any of our existing outstanding BOV appointees.
Yeah, no, fair enough.
We're phenomenally lucky to have them. I just wanted to make that observation as a governance point.
So again, we are a separate 501c3 organization, supporting organization to UVA. We have a contractual relationship that really serves as the bedrock for the interaction between UVA and UVMCO. We also have day-to-day interaction, specifically with Augie and Julie and JJ work very closely with all of those folks, but we are not involved in spending rate decisions. We are not involved in SIF allocations. We really have no voice in the use of the funds at the university or the associated foundations. That was really quick. I apologize. I'm going to turn it over to Robert,
Great,
who's going to
thanks.
go through this with alacrity.
Yes. We've talked in the past about how our $14 billion in the long-term pool kind of breaks down in terms of endowment, SIF. JJ's covered some of that. I won't belabor it here. There's a pie chart as well on the deck. Consider some of the materials in this deck as background, specifically related to private investments, how we invest. So like Christina said, I'll move quickly. But a couple important points to make here. I think it is helpful for framing how we invest and how we kind of think of our objectives. First of all, we are investing across a very long time horizon. We consider that an advantage. We talk about the unfair advantages that we have at UVMCO versus a simple 70-30 or 75-25 passive policy portfolio, and one of those is our long-term horizon. We try to add value through our asset allocation decisions. We measure ourselves against the 75-25. That has not historically been sufficient to meet our core objective of generating an 8% return, which is the return required to maintain the purchasing power of endowed assets. So we do need to add value. We have historically, though we don't take it for granted in any given period. We focus primarily on external investment manager selection. I'll talk about that in the next slide. And we do try to add value through tilts relative to our simple passive index. Specifically, 46 people at UVMCO today, split roughly 50-50 between the investment team and our operations. Most of the folks on our investment team are interacting with external managers. One of our unfair advantages is having access to some of the best investors in the world, whether they're focused on venture capital, hedge fund strategies, buyouts, public equity strategies. We have roughly 85 of them split across our 10 strategies. Those 10 strategies are kind of outlined on our performance slide later. In general, we're looking for those with an edge and expertise and who are aligned with us. We tend to have relationships for 7 to 10 years. 7 on average for our liquid strategies, hedge funds, public equity, 10 on the private side. Consider this background, but we do invest 45% of the pool in private investments, which really bear no performance resemblance in any short period to our passive index. That 45% of the pool is probably best measured over 5, 7, 10-year periods. I talked about needing to add value. Our policy index has generated roughly a 7% return over the long term, 10, 20 years. We've performed in excess of that, about 200 basis points, and that compounds over time. And so that difference amounts to a lot of money when applied over multiple decades. Talked about our objectives. Just to make this very clear, we do measure ourselves against that required return of 8%. We adopt a policy, a risk policy of equity and fixed income, really for a risk approximation. We think a 75-25 policy index with about a 0.75 beta or equity sensitivity to the markets is most appropriate for long-term assets. But as I've hopefully made clear, we do not invest in that. We don't invest in it because we don't think it's sufficient to generate our required return. We invest in assets that are very different, in some instances, difficult to approximate on the short term relative to that 75-25. For example, venture capital certainly has risk. It has a lot of risk. Over 10 years, I would actually argue that its risk is not meaningfully higher than other liquid areas of equities, but in the short term, it might not look anything like the MSCI ACWI, which is our equity index, or the S&P 500. So over 5, 10, 20 years, we've met our objectives. Again, we needed to generate an 8% return. We've done that across 5, 10, 20 years. We've wanted to outperform by 200 basis points. Over 10 years, it's 140 basis points, but in general, it's been a history of success. We do measure ourselves against peers as well. over 5, 10, 20 years, either in the second or first quartile of our peer rankings. Over the short term, it's been a more difficult environment. You can see over 3 years, our policy portfolio has gained 4%, which is pretty wild when you think that about the fact that the S&P is up something like 30% since last October. In the short term, you can see significant gyrations in our policy index. We're up 1.5% over that time period. Why have we underperformed our policy index over 3 years? Largely due to privates. Again, 45% of the pool. It has contributed probably negative 200 to 300 basis points of underperformance. Again, we don't tend to measure that over 3-year periods. We think that's too short. Over 5, 10, and 20, our private portfolio is outperformed by 500 basis points versus the MSCI ACWI. No guarantee that that will change anytime soon, but given enough time, we're very confident in it. It's been a difficult investment environment as well, just from a market concentration standpoint. I think you all know that a lot of the gains in public indices have been powered by a small collection of companies, the hyperscalers in an AI context and semiconductor companies, notably NVIDIA. Who knows when that will change either. We don't try to match the policy weightings of the MSCI ACWI. We tend to invest a little bit more in smaller and mid-cap companies, not necessarily out of a preference for those companies, but because our managers have more of an edge in pursuing investments in them. That has not worked over the last year. That's been a little bit better fiscal year to date, but of course we're only 2.5 months in. Bit of an eye chart, but here's a little more specificity over over our performance over time. You can see over 5 years kind of the outperformance in privates that I referenced earlier, generating outperformance both in equities and diversifiers. A couple areas of focus for us today would be liquid equities. We'd like our public equity and long-short strategies to perform better than they have. So that's an area of intense concentration at UVMCO. Focus on AI as well. We have our own board meeting next Thursday in Boston. We'll have outside speakers on AI. We're thinking of convening our board in San Francisco in early part of calendar 25 to also engage with our managers on this topic. So nothing has been kind of more kind of critical to understand on our team, and I don't anticipate that changing in the near term. With that, I will actually pause. I think
we got time for a couple questions.
Yes.
Yeah, so I when I saw the returns last year, first thing I did was go look up Yale, because it has been, or it still is, sort of the gold standard, and also the extreme example of privates versus public. So I think they have maybe 5% in stocks, but somewhere around there, single digits. And I noticed your return was low, but so is theirs. And they weren't that far apart. And so I think it might be helpful. I think they have, so you have 45% privates. It might be helpful to show how we compare to other institutions, not now, but in the future as you report this. Show Yale, but also what those percentages of privates are, because that impacts the returns so much. And also comment as to how your mark to market goes, like, because a lot of firms haven't been good about marking to market. So, how do you guys handle that?
Yeah, a couple things. We happy to share kind of peer performance. We tend to not have that at this time of year.
Right.
Our peers will start reporting their fiscal year end performance right around now. We had a slide on that in March, and we can bring that back in March as well. Did you want to comment on Mark's?
I mean, the short answer is it's a very complex process. We use every bit of data that we have available. One of the things that we do to test our valuations, because all these private firms are generally audited as of the end of the calendar year, so we strike our December NAV in 5 days and then compare those numbers to what we get in the audited financial statements and strive for somewhere in the neighborhood of a 1% to 2% variance, assume all things are equal. But again, the short answer is it's complex. You should call me. We can talk about it for an hour. But it's a very difficult process.
We're definitely not going to do that here. Other questions? Yes.
I appreciated your comments on divestment, but I was wondering how you're thinking about exposure to China and what if the federal government were to ban TikTok and ByteDance or name other private companies as arms of the communist government. How are you thinking about exposure in those instances?
Yeah, that's, along with AI, it's probably the top 2 or 3 topic within our investment team meetings. Our exposure has come down. It probably peaked around 12.5% in 21. Largely through strong performance is how it got to 12.5%. It used to be a market characterized by high alpha and good growth rates. It is now roughly 7% of the pool. So we've been actively reducing our exposure on the liquid side. Of course, it's also come down through relative performance. Chinese markets have not performed well versus the US and the rest of the world since then. But we've not made a new private commitment to China. I think the trend is a concerning one. And certainly investors have not been paid to take that risk over the last 3 to 5 years, and we're not seeing great signs that that's going to change.
Real quick, what's our distribution policy from the endowment? What do we pull?
The ban that you approve is 3 to 5%, and it's based on past performance, trailing 12 quarters.
All right. Do we have time for one more?
Yeah, well, one last one. You get the last one.
Thanks. I represent the faculty, and the faculty representative represent many faculty who think we should divest. Could you just talk really briefly, is this something you just won't do, you can't do, some combo of both? Just so as I report to my faculty, the position of this.
Some combination. We have an advisory committee on investor responsibility to hear arguments for divestment. This is something that we set up multiple years ago as faculty engagement on it. So we do hear arguments for it. We do not like using our investment strategy as a means of expressing a moral political opinion. Walking through the model with which we invest, it would also be very difficult. We have 85 external managers. We don't often have perfect visibility into their underlying positions. And it would be, in some instances, very difficult to renegotiate investment management agreements with them to add a screen like this. I'll leave it out. Oh, and finally, it's questionable as to whether or not we're even allowed to under Virginia state law. And there's been an opinion provided by Virginia's, I think, Attorney General this summer as to the question of whether that would even be legal to consider non-pecuniary factors in our investment policy.
Well, we appreciate the presentation. Thanks to all the committee members for their active engagement. We are going to adjourn 10 minutes late. Sorry about that, Rachel.
No problem. I have nothing to talk about.
So the Finance Committee is adjourned.
Great. No. Okay. I think we need to, some people are coming in. Yes. Yeah, and then people can like go. Yeah.
You want to give her the gavel? You need the gavel.
It's all right.